So, can you tell us about the first time where you knew that physics is what you wanted to do, or the first maybe idea that sparked in your head that said, "Wow, this is absolutely amazing."
Yeah, I mean, it goes back far enough that it's almost something that I spent 10 years trying to escape just before I convinced myself that no, that really was it. It was my destiny. Um, my dad was an electrical engineer, so I sort of, grew up hearing about scientific kinds of stuff. And in retrospect, I can see back then that our different perspectives already meant I was not going to be an engineer, but something like a physicist. He would try to explain to me simple concepts of electric circuits. And, I like knowing how you could build something, but the way that a real engineer works, where they want to know how can I buy a chip that does all these things, that never interested me because I wanted to know what was inside the chip, and I wanted to know how the transistor worked, and I wanted to know why the electrons did what they did. And one of my early memories about that was him just telling me that electrons were, I don't know, in maybe he was telling me about orbitals and atoms or something like that, but he explained they couldn't be in the same place at the same time. And I asked him why, and he just got so impatient with me. That's just the rule. You just go with it. And I think that was when he gave up on me and pretty much lost interest. Even years later, he would visit our labs, and he would just love looking at all the equipment. And then he'd ask what in the world we're doing with the equipment, and he would just shake his head at what a waste of time it was to ask these abstract questions when we had such fancy equipment that we could just use to do something more practical. But honestly, when I began studying it, I probably like a lot of physicists, you ask the answer is a little bit embarrassing. It's that I was a Star Trek fan. I wanted to know what would you have to
Wow.
do to build a spaceship and build a Starfleet. And with a friend, we used to come up with plans for what this fleet would be like. And this I also remember well that someone told me at some point that there was a real complication to how you land a spacecraft, and they went into some sorts of details, but. I asked probably at that point my stepfather about it, and he said, "Oh, I can't answer these questions for you. For that, you need to learn calculus," which was a
Oh,
great way of getting rid of me. So I spent a
yeah.
summer reading a Calculus Made Easy book, and by the end of the book, I realized I still have no idea how you would have to land a spacecraft. And he said, "Oh, maybe it's not really calculus. Maybe it's physics." And I don't even think I knew what physics was at that point. But from that point on, I started trying to study physics when I could.
Wow.
What really kind of cemented my path, I think, was years later reading again some kind of science fiction book, actually a really weird book that brought up ideas about Schrodinger's cat and entanglement and so forth. And crazy book, but it actually had a glossary that explained a lot of its concepts. And in the glossary, it even explained what Bell's theorem was and talked about Alain Aspec's experiments, which years later I realized how remarkable it was because this book must have been published a few years after Alain Aspect did his Bell inequality experiments. And these science fiction authors were already using it and explaining it.
Wow.
But the way they described entanglement and Bell's inequalities, they said something like once two particles have interacted, they remain forever connected no matter how far apart you take them. And these days I would take issues with the detail of that phrasing, but the idea that you could even think to prove such a thing and what it would take to prove it just mystified me. And from that moment on, and again, I was probably 13 or something at the time, I was just reading a book. I was just driven to take a quantum mechanics course as soon as I could to find out
Wow.
where do they get these wild ideas. And
Mm.
I've pretty much been stuck ever since.
So that was your goal from the beginning, was to go directly to quantum mechanics.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I liked physics fine, the way you like solving puzzles or whatever, and I would solve the blocks rolling down the inclined planes, and I liked the fact that I could get the right answer. But honestly, I couldn't care less about blocks rolling down inclined planes. I wanted to know about the atom. I wanted to know what the world is made of. Like most people, I guess, who go on to study physics, I thought more in terms of particle physics at the time. And, I'd watch TV specials explaining about quarks and gluons, and I wanted to know what was next, and I wanted to know about black holes. Um,
Hmm.
but the thing that really stuck with me was not, which particles are made of which other particles. That's zoology or botany at some level. It's what are the rules that governs all of it. And as time went on, I learned that was really quantum mechanics.
And did
Um,
you always want to become an experimentalist, or were you maybe
kind of leaning into the theorist side, and then you're like, hey, maybe this is not for me or something like that? Or was it always
No,
experimentalist?
I don't think I had a strong view of that early on. I mean, I don't know how much you guys know or think about that distinction at this stage, right? When I was a second year undergraduate, I probably didn't think about it very much. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and, I guess I was one of these people who was good at math by high school standards, but not necessarily by the standards of physics majors at a good university.
Mm-hmm.
I was fine at it, but I can't say I enjoyed just like struggling through integrals and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point I thought about it, and I guess I had this image of what it would be like to be a theorist. And, as much as I would love to solve the riddle of quantum gravity or what have you, I tried to picture what would you do day to day as a theorist, waiting for that inspiration. And maybe I just didn't have enough good role models, but I just didn't see what I would do staring at that blank blackboard, wondering what to do. Whereas I kind of understood what you would do day to day, between inspirations as an experimentalist, that you're really just trying to do something concrete while waiting for the next idea.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but again, a lot of it has to do with role models and also with timing. And I think this is something you'll see no matter what. That there are many different paths you could follow, and who knows which one you will take. But the people you meet along the way and the people who mentor you are going to be a big part of that. And I'm sure I could have wound up doing other things, but the guy who was the director of undergraduate studies when I was an undergrad, so like, as a shy student who didn't really approach my professors much, the guy I had to go to once a term to get him to sign my schedule was really outgoing. And, honestly, like most physicists, if you asked him, what are you working on? You'd get a 2 hour response, no matter who you were, because he was so excited about it. And he was a great teacher and a great researcher.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up doing my senior thesis with him. And he taught me about a lot of what was going on in the late 80s in atomic, molecular, and optical physics. He told me about laser cooling and the fact that you could cool and trap individual atoms. He told me about the fact that the electromagnetic vacuum could have physical effects on these cold atoms. Um, he taught me about time reversal symmetry and the fact that you could use spectroscopy on atoms to look for evidence of the fact that the universe is not time reversal symmetric or mirror reversal symmetric. And these are the
Wow.
kinds of deep issues that I wanted to keep
Mm-hmm.
studying. So I think it was largely his influence that made me think of that. Um, Years later, when I started getting interested in quantum information, I realized if I'd been an undergraduate or a starting graduate student in those days, there's a good chance that that would have grabbed me, that there are so many deep questions there and problems that were ripe for being tackled, almost like being in the early days of quantum mechanics, where, in 1928, if you had learned quantum mechanics, you just would say, here's a problem no one's been able to solve before. Let me try it with quantum mechanics. And if you were reasonably good at it, I think there was just a lot of so-called low-hanging fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and part of me feels that way about quantum information. And maybe the early, somewhat easier stuff, all the pioneering work has already been done, but there's still so much out there. So
Yeah.
starting out these days, I'd be more torn between theory and experiment than when I was making the choice. And a lot of theorists were just either striving to go off and do string theory, where 99 people out of 100 never even get a job, um, or maybe just doing really, really detailed calculations that I didn't see the interest in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that's evolved. But I think, it's not really what you asked, but to give a kind of bit of unwarranted advice, I'll say that people often think of the most exciting aspects of a career and the biggest questions you can ask and what happens on, the best day of your year. And that's not what life is about. Life is also about the day to day. So you
Yeah.
want to be working on something where the big questions excite you, but you can do that in many different fields. You also want to work on something where you have what it takes to get through the hard times and where you're going to enjoy the struggles.
True.
And I
That
think
is
the
true.
point is there are some people who really enjoy fighting with recalcitrant equipment, even if the question doesn't matter to them. And there are people who really enjoy staying up until 6 in the morning doing some coding, even if, it's just to write a video game. And there are people who
Mm-hmm.
really enjoy solving an integral just because they get caught up in the abstract mathematical thought. And the question is, where are your talents and where does your patience lie also?